All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another deep dive with us. And today we're going to be talking about human rights.
Yeah?
And, it's one of those things that's like so fundamental to the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hard to even know where to begin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to help us out with this, we're looking at this text today that's actually, geared towards kids,
Right.
which I think is kind of brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it takes this, really complex, often abstract concept and kind of boils it down to the essentials.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about this source is that it really does start from the very beginning.
Okay.
With a young girl named Maria
Oh, I like that.
who asks her parents, like, what are human rights?
Mm-hmm.
And it's that kind of fundamental question that I think a lot of us have. Maybe we don't even realize we have it.
Yeah.
It's like, what are these things?
Exactly.
Why do they matter?
Yeah, and the text actually does a really good job of providing like a clear and simple definition.
It does.
Which is kind of like refreshing. It's like, human rights are these basic rights and freedoms that everyone is entitled to simply because they're human.
Exactly. It's not because you're, a good person.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not because you're, part of this group or that group.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because you exist.
Right, you're a human being.
You're a human being.
That's it.
And that's a radical idea.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about it historically, that's not how things have always been.
Yeah.
For a long time, the concept of human rights just wasn't a thing.
Right.
Power was concentrated in the hands of kings and queens.
Yeah.
Religious leaders and ordinary people didn't really have any inherent rights.
So was there no one like pushing back against this? Were people just like, okay, this is the way it is?
I mean, well, there were always individuals
Right.
and
Wow.
groups fighting for justice and equality.
Yeah.
But it was a long and arduous process,
Yeah.
to get to a point where human rights were recognized.
Okay, so then how did we get to this point? Like, was there a specific moment or like a turning point?
Well, I mean, there were many turning points,
Okay.
but a major one was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948.
Oh, that's the big one.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine the world had just gone through the horrors of World War II
Mm-hmm.
with genocide, massive human rights abuses?
So like people were like, okay, we need to actually like codify this.
We got to make sure this never happens again.
Right.
So they got together
Yeah.
and they created this document.
It's incredible. Like, I mean, it feels so basic to us now, I think, to just say like, oh, every human has rights.
Yeah.
But like back then, I mean, that was revolutionary.
It was.
So what exactly did this document say?
Well, it basically listed out a whole bunch of specific rights that everyone should have.
Okay, like what kind of stuff?
I mean, everything from the right to life,
Mm.
liberty, security, freedom from torture,
That's pretty important stuff.
pretty important stuff.
So it's like a whole range of things. It's
Okay.
not just like, one or two things.
Right, and that's what makes it so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's recognizing that human rights are interconnected.
Okay.
You can't really have freedom of speech
Right.
if you're constantly worried about being killed or you don't have enough food to eat.
That makes sense. Yeah. So our source breaks it down like this. They talk about the right to freedom,
Yeah.
safety, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
the right to education, the right to work, the right to rest.
Yeah, these are all so critical.
I mean, it's all in there.
And it's important to remember
Yeah.
that these rights aren't just theoretical.
Right.
They have a real impact on people's lives.
Okay, but here's the thing that I'm like, kind of struggling with.
Mm.
If these rights are universal, like, why is there still so much suffering in the world? Like, do people actually have these rights in practice?
That's a really important question. And sadly, the answer is not always a simple yes.
Yeah.
The Universal Declaration was a huge step forward,
Right.
but it wasn't a magic solution.
Right.
There's still so much discrimination, violence,
Yeah.
and oppression happening all over the world.
So it's like a work in progress.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing struggle
Yeah.
to make sure that these rights are actually realized for everyone,
Okay.
everywhere.
So where do we go from here? Like, how do we bridge that gap between what should be and what actually is?
Well, that's where I think the stories of individuals and
How so?
movements really come into play.
Right. Like the source mentions Nelson Mandela, right?
Sure.
Who fought against apartheid in South Africa.
Right. He spent 27 years in prison for his belief,
27 years. That's wild.
but he never gave up hope,
Mm.
and he continued to fight for equality and justice.
It's just like one person can make such a difference.
Exactly. And his story shows that even in the face of incredible adversity,
Right.
it's possible to create change.
It kind of reminds me of Malala Yousafzai, who
Right.
stood up for girls' education, you know?
She risked her life
Yeah.
to speak out against the Taliban.
It's incredible.
And she became this global symbol
Yeah.
of the fight for human rights.
And those are huge, huge names, you know?
They are.
But it's also about what her source says is like focusing on children's rights,
Mm-hmm.
the right to play,
Yes.
to learn,
To be cared for.
to be cared for.
Yeah.
Like that's huge.
It is. And, you might be thinking, well, I'm not a parent.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I'm not a teacher. Like, why should I care about this?
Yeah.
But it's all connected.
Oh.
When we
good.
protect children's rights,
Yeah.
we're investing in the future.
Right. We're creating a better world for everyone.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all of this ties together. It's like it's not just about these abstract principles. It's about real people's lives.
It is. And the source highlights this really well
Okay.
when Maria asks her parents,
Yeah.
do we actually have all these rights?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, yes, but we have to respect the rights of others.
That's interesting.
Right. So it's not just about demanding our own rights.
It's a two-way street.
It is. It's about recognizing that everyone
Mhm.
deserves those same rights and freedoms.
So it's like personal responsibility comes into play here, right?
Absolutely.
That's
It's not enough to just know about human rights.
right.
We have to actively defend them
Okay.
for ourselves and for others.
So like what does that look like in practice?
Well, the source gives us some great examples through Maria's actions.
Okay.
She chooses to help those in need.
Mm-hmm.
She learns about diversity and respect.
Okay.
She even makes posters to educate other kids about their rights.
Wow, she's taking action.
She is.
She's not just like learning about it, she's actually doing something.
Exactly. And the text even highlights her dream of becoming a lawyer
Oh, cool.
to fight for fairness and justice.
So it's like this lifelong journey.
It is. Human rights are not something you learn about once and then you're done.
Right.
It's a constant process of learning, reflecting,
yeah.
and engaging with the world around us.
Okay, this is a
Yeah.
lot to take in.
No,
now.
no,
But
yeah.
I'm really glad we're having this conversation.
Me too.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a lot, but it's important.
Yeah, it is.
It's important to remember
Okay.
that even though the fight for human rights can feel overwhelming at times,
Mm-hmm.
there are things we can all do to contribute.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
We
We talked about the history, we talked about the different types of rights, and even some inspiring figures who fought for these rights. But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, right?
There's so much more to explore.
There is. And in the next part,
Yeah.
we're going to dive into how these rights play out in our ever-changing world.
All right, we'll be right back after a short break
See you then.
to continue our deep dive into human rights.
Looking forward to it.
So welcome back to our deep dive on human rights.
Yeah.
And, we just finished talking about kind of the history, like how we got to this point where we
Yeah.
recognize these fundamental human rights.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, like, how do these rights hold up in our modern world?
That's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Because the world has changed so much
Right.
since the Universal Declaration was written back in 1948.
Yeah, I mean, think about technology, for example.
Yeah.
Like the internet, social media.
Right. All this stuff.
All of that was unimaginable back then.
It didn't exist.
So how do these principles, these rights,
Yeah.
apply to these new challenges?
Right. I mean, it's almost like a whole new frontier for human rights,
Okay, give me an example.
like privacy,
Oh, yeah.
the right to privacy in the digital age.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it.
Mm-hmm.
We're constantly being tracked online.
It's
Our data is being collected.
Yeah. Like, is that even covered by the Universal Declaration?
Well, that's a good question. Article 12 does talk about protection against arbitrary interference with privacy.
Okay.
But interpreting that in today's world with
Yeah.
all the technology we have,
It's tricky.
it gets really complicated.
So how do we navigate this? Like, where do we even begin?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that there's this constant tension
Okay.
between security and privacy.
Yeah.
Governments argue that surveillance is necessary to keep us safe,
Right.
to prevent crime, to combat terrorism.
Okay, sure.
But
Yeah.
how much of our privacy are we willing to sacrifice
Yeah.
for that security?
That's a really good question.
And it's not just governments.
Right.
Tech companies are collecting massive amounts of data on us, too.
True. Yeah.
So we have to ask ourselves,
Yeah.
are they doing enough to protect our information?
I mean, I'm not sure. Like, how do I even know?
And that's part of the challenge.
Yeah.
Is that we need to be informed.
Okay.
We need to be engaged citizens
Right.
and advocate for policies that protect our rights in the digital sphere.
So it's about like taking responsibility for our own digital lives as well.
It is.
It's not just about blaming the government or blaming the companies.
Right. We have a role to play too.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it goes back to that core principle
Yeah.
of respect.
Okay.
You know, whether we're interacting online or face to face,
Right.
we need to treat each other with dignity.
It's true.
But the digital world also presents some unique challenges.
Like what?
Well, think about the spread of misinformation
Oh, yeah.
and hate speech online.
Right.
How do we balance freedom of expression
Mhm.
with the need to protect people from harmful content?
That's a tough one.
It is, and there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
I mean, who gets to decide what's harmful?
Exactly.
Yeah. Where do we draw the line between censorship and protecting vulnerable groups?
I feel like this is something we're going to be grappling with for a long time.
I think so too.
It's a constantly evolving challenge, and
Yeah.
we need to be having these conversations
They do.
to figure out how to navigate this new landscape.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to approach these issues
Yeah.
with empathy and critical thinking.
Okay.
We need to be willing to listen to different perspectives
Right. I think that's key.
and recognize that there's often not a simple right or wrong answer.
Yeah. It's not black and white.
It's not.
It's very gray.
It is. And, you know, even though our source doesn't go into all of these complexities because it is for kids,
Yeah.
I think it lays a really important foundation.
Okay.
It reminds us that human rights are not just about grand gestures
Right.
or political movements.
Yeah.
They're also about those everyday actions.
Okay. So what can I do?
Well, I think it starts with being mindful of our own online behavior. You know, what we share, what we say,
Mhm.
the information we consume.
Yeah.
We can also support organizations that are fighting for digital rights
Well, that's a good idea.
and advocate for policies that protect our privacy and freedom of expression.
Okay. So it's like a combination of personal action and then also like advocating for bigger changes.
Exactly. It's both.
Okay. That makes me feel a little less helpless, honestly.
I think that's the point, is
Yeah.
that we all have a role to play,
Right.
even if it seems small.
Good.
It all adds up.
Okay, so we talked about technology.
We did.
What are some other modern day challenges to human rights?
Oh, there are so many.
Yeah.
I mean, climate change is a huge one.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You know, rising sea levels, extreme weather events, resource scarcity, all of these things are
Yeah.
already displacing millions of people.
I never thought about that connection, like climate change and human rights.
Well, it's all connected.
Yeah.
I mean, if people are forced to flee their homes
Mhm.
because of climate change,
Yeah.
what happens to their right to a safe and secure environment?
Wow, that's a really good point.
Their right to housing, healthcare, education.
That's like a domino effect.
It is. One thing leads to another.
Yeah, and I feel like this is just the beginning.
I think you're right.
Like climate change is only going to get worse.
Unfortunately.
So these challenges are going to become even more pressing.
And that's why it's so important to be having these conversations now.
Right.
You know, to be thinking about how we can address these issues
Yeah.
before they become even more dire.
Okay, so it feels a little overwhelming.
I know.
But I also feel like it's really important.
It is.
Like, we need to be talking about this.
Absolutely.
We need to be aware of these challenges.
We do.
And start thinking about solutions.
Right. And it goes back to that idea
Yeah.
of personal responsibility.
Okay.
We can't just wait for governments or international organizations
Right.
to fix everything.
We have to do our part.
We do.
Okay, so, like, what can I do about climate change?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things. We can reduce our own carbon footprint.
Okay.
We can support organizations that are working on climate justice.
Mm-hmm.
We can vote for leaders who prioritize environmental protection.
Yeah, okay.
And we can talk about these issues with our friends and family.
Right, spread awareness.
Exactly. Make it part of the conversation.
Okay, I'm starting to see how it all ties together.
Yeah.
Like, all these different issues, they're all connected,
They are?
and they all ultimately impact human rights.
They do.
So it's really about looking at the bigger picture.
It is. And recognizing that our actions,
Yeah.
both big and small,
Right.
can have a ripple effect
Yeah.
on the world around us.
Okay, this has been really insightful.
I'm glad.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of human rights now
Me too.
than I did before.
It's been a good conversation.
It has.
I'm glad we had it.
So we've talked about kind of like the big picture, the history, the challenges,
Mm-hmm.
but what about the individual?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about in the next part.
Oh, perfect.
We're going to explore what each of us can do
Okay.
to uphold human rights.
Sounds good. I'm ready.
Let's do it.
All right, so we're back, and I gotta say,
Yeah.
this deep dive into human rights has been pretty intense.
It has been a lot.
We've gone from the history of human rights
Right.
to all these modern-day challenges like technology and climate change.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
It is. It's huge, and to be honest,
Mhm.
it can feel kind of overwhelming sometimes.
I get that.
Like, where do I even fit in?
Yeah.
What can one person really do to make a difference in all of this?
Well, and that's where I think this children's book that we've been looking at
Okay.
really shines.
Okay, why is that?
It brings it back to the individual.
Okay.
It reminds us that human rights aren't just about these grand pronouncements or international agreements.
Right.
It's about the choices we make every single day.
So it's like, it's not about being a Nelson Mandela or a Malala.
Exactly.
It's about the little things.
It is. It's about those everyday actions.
Okay, like what kind of things?
Well, think about Maria.
Okay.
She chooses to help people in need.
Yeah.
She stands up for what she believes in.
Mm-hmm.
Even something as simple as making posters to teach other kids about human rights.
Yeah, like those things might seem small,
They do.
but they can actually have a big impact.
They can. It's like that butterfly effect.
Oh, yeah.
One small action can ripple out and create a wave of change.
Okay, so it's not about feeling like I have to solve all the world's problems.
No, not at all.
It's about focusing on what I can do in my own little corner of the world.
Exactly. And I think that's really empowering.
It is, yeah.
It's recognizing that we each have a role to play.
Okay, so how do I figure out what my role is?
Well, I think it starts with paying attention
Okay.
to what's happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
What are the issues that you care about? What are the injustices that you see in your community?
Okay, and then what?
Well, then you can start thinking about ways to get involved.
Okay.
Maybe it's volunteering your time.
Right.
Maybe it's donating to an organization that's working on an issue you care about.
Yeah.
Maybe it's simply speaking up when you see something that's wrong.
Okay, so it's about finding what resonates with me
Exactly.
and then taking action.
It is. And
Yeah.
remember,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be anything huge or dramatic.
Right.
Even small actions can make a difference.
Okay, I like that.
It's about being consistent.
Mm-hmm.
It's about showing up.
Yeah.
It's about using your voice.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to ask you, our listeners, a question.
Okay.
What is one thing you can do today
Mm-hmm.
to make the world a little bit more, just a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more in line with those human rights principles we've been talking about?
It's a good question.
Maybe it's something small, like smiling at a stranger. Or maybe it's something bigger, like volunteering your time or donating to a cause.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, take that step.
Do it.
Make a difference.
Human rights are not just words.
Yes.
They're actions.
Exactly. And it's up to all of us
It is.
to make those rights a reality.
Well said.
That's it for our deep dive into human rights.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
We hope you learned something new
I hope so.
and that you're feeling inspired to go out there and make a difference.
Keep learning
Keep questioning.
and keep fighting the good fight.
And until next time, stay curious
Yeah.
and keep diving deep.